Magic Whip. She has also published fiction and memoir and has translated Chinese poetry, along with many multimedia solo exhibitions. She collaborated with the British filmmaker Isaac Julian on 10,000 Waves, a film installation about illegal Chinese immigration in London. And I'm just going to start by asking Ping, can you tell us a little bit about your new book, My Name is Immigrant?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And this book have, was in the making since the day I actually arrived in America in 1986, and I was in New York, and I was going to grad school, first in Long Island University and then NYU. And doing my PhD, I got two masters, then PhD in comparative literature, and I was living in Flushing. So I just remembered, like, for my first 8 months, I moved 10 times uh, because I had no money and I couldn't really afford decent places. And then the place when you pay like $100 or $200 for a room in New York at that time was really like dumpy place, like basement or in like really bad places. So I have to constantly move, and then at the same time, I was going to school full time, and I had to work under the table as a waitress, and um, and then also I was hanging out with artists like Ai Weiwei, right? And I was translating and working for Allen Ginsberg, and I was translating for like from Chinese to English, English to Chinese, for the poetry festival, which involved like Chinese poets like Bei Dao, Yang Lian, Gu Chen, and then American poets like Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, John Ashbery, all these people, and Amiri Baraka, and so I got to meet the best of American culture. And I was also working in a restaurant. I was meeting all kinds of people, right? So just like it's like a multi-universe and multi-cultures, and just like tsunami waves just coming over me, like over. Meantime, I have to struggle to make, I was living like $20 a week, right, on food, transportation. So I was starving all the time, and I was constantly just worried about where I'm going to live next day, right? And because I have no money, so all these things, and then people constantly just yell at me to go back to where you came from, or of course, lots of sexual harassment constantly, because I was still younger at that time. And so, yeah, life was pretty interesting and complicated. So, and at that time, I wasn't even writing, and I was just really, really stressed out. And then one day, I walked into a wrong classroom, and I thought it was 18th century British novel class, and which was required. And then the professor turned out to be a very unusual person, and he had like long hair, just wild, and he had two shirts, and both shirts were like buttoned wrong, misbuttoned, and he had white like splash of paint all over his like his clothing, on his shoes, and then he was borrowing a Kleenex from a student because he had a cold. And I was just so curious, just like, who's this person, And turned out he was Louis Wash, a poet from New York school, and I sat down and just thought, oh, let me check that out. And I wrote my first story ever, and Then everyone loved it, and the professor said, wrote on the paper that you should start writing a novel. And that just like the monk Zen master just hit me on my head, was just whack, right? And I just said, oh, this is why I came to America, to tell my story, right? And this is how I started writing, all in just in poetry. And actually, I started writing stories first. Then I started working for Allen Ginsberg, and through that almost a year of work together, I started writing poetry. And then when I met Ai Weiwei and the Chinese immigrants who jumped boat at the Rockaway, and the boat was called the Golden Venture, and a lot of people died, and they were buried in the public cemetery in New Jersey. And I was very shocked by their story, saddened, and I wanted to write something, but I didn't know how to go about it. Then the Poetry Project invited me to read together with Allen Ginsberg, and he was going to read How. So I just thought, all right, I need to write something with weight, right? And so I decided to visit the cemetery to just, I don't know why at that time, I just wanted to visit the cemetery in New Jersey. So I begged a friend who was a Marine and who had a car, and we drove there, and we just couldn't get there. We just kept getting lost, and then just a storm coming out of nowhere, then a hailstorm. By the time we got there, the cemetery was closed, and I tried to communicate. I understood that the spirits didn't want me to get too close, but they still wanted me to write about their story, right? So that is my first story, the narrative poem called "The Call of Souls from Golden Venture," right? And I spent 3 days writing the poem with no food, no sleep, and I finished it and I performed it with Allen Ginsberg, and everyone just I could tell it left a huge mark on people. And then Adrian Rich selected the poem for the best American poetry, and yeah, and then a few years later, I read a poem at Pittsburgh University, and then after I read it, the British filmmaker Isaac Julian came up to me, said, "I want you to come to London and write about the immigrants who drowned at Morecambe Bay." And so I went there and wrote a poem, and he used it for his film, right? And this is just like chain reaction, just one poem after another. I started with my own experiences, then with the Rockaway immigrants, and then Morecambe Bay from London, and then extended to the immigrants from Central America, Mexico, and from South Asia, and then from Middle East, right? And Syria, there are actually quite a few poems from Syria, refugees. So, yeah, so this is how this book came. And also realize like it's not about allergy for them, but it's also odes to them, to immigration, because immigration and migration is embedded in our life, right? And if we look at the natural world, and life moves all the time, birds, animals, fish, right? Salmon, and butterflies. And if we look at the most basic unit for life, the cell, the moment cell comes to life, the migration begins. That's the definition in medical terms in biology. Migration begins when cell begins to live, right? And what does that mean, right? For humans, right? and what does that mean for the borders, right? And the existence of borders, right? What does it mean to the animals, right? And the wall Trump is building, it stops migration for a lot of animals, right? Not just human beings. So, yeah. So this is the question, and allergy and the oats and the for all life, for immigrants, for migrants, for all sentient beings. So that's my answer to your question. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to start reading
Sure.
maybe one or two poems and then throw it open for questions and comments?
Yeah, I will. I'll read the very first poem that's dedicated for all immigrants and migrants around the world, and actually dedicated also to that 3-year-old Syrian boy whose body was washed up to the shore. And when I saw that image, I just couldn't stop crying, and then the words just came to me. Things we carry on the sea. We carry tears in our eyes. Goodbye, Father. Goodbye, Mother. We carry soil in small bags. May home never fade from our hearts. We carry names, stories, memories of our village, our civilization. We carry scars from proxy wars of greed. We carry carnage of mining, droughts, floods, genocides. We carry dust of our families incinerated in mushroom clouds. We carry our islands sinking under the sea. We carry our hands, feet, bones, hearts, and best minds to start a new life. We carry diplomas, medicine, engineer, nurse, education, math, poetry, even if they mean nothing to the other shore. We carry railroads, plantations, laundromats, taco trucks, farms, factories, hospitals, schools, temples, all built on our ancestors' backs. We carry old homes along the spine, new dreams in our chests. We carry yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We are orphans of the wars forced upon us. We are refugees of the sea drowning in plastic wastes. We came from the same mother in Africa. We are your children, sisters and brothers, fathers and mothers. Our tongues carry the same weight as we chant. I, Hub, Liber, Amour, Love, 平安, Salam, Shalom, Paz, Peace, 希望, Amal, Hoffnung, Esperanza, Hope, 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 as we drift from dream to dream, sea to sea. And I'll also read a poem. It's called Immigrants Can't Write Poetry. I wrote this poem because when I started writing, I was engaged to a professor at McGill University in Canada, and he told me with your second grade level English, there's no way I could make a living with poetry or stories, and it will be easier to go to paradise than to get published in English, right? He actually convinced me to take a GMAT exam, and I actually was admitted into MBA at McGill University. So I was going to get married and become a businesswoman, right? And it's on the eve of that, going to Canada, Montreal, that I decided that I'd rather be a starving poet, follow my heart to write poetry. At that time, like all my possessions, including my saving grace, right? I had like 2 pieces of porcelain from Ming Dynasty, and that was like if I ran out of money, that would be like my rescuer, right? I could sell for. It's actually worth like millions of U.S. dollars, renminbi, So, and it was already all shipped to Canada, and I never got them back. So, yeah, so my poems actually is worth a lot of money actually. So has cost me a lot of money, but it's so worth it. So this poem is for the comment of like Helen Wendler, and whose daughter-in-law actually was my classmate from Beijing University. She's a poet and she writes poetry in Chinese, and she's actually now the prosecutor in California, because when she wanted to write poetry in English, Helen told her like, maybe not, because just like not with your syntax, right? And so here's my poem. She walked to mountain. She walks to a mountain. She walk to mountain now. She is walking to a mountain now. What difference it make? What difference does it make? In nature, no completeness, no sentence really complete thought. Language, our birthright and curse, pay no mind to immigrant syntax. Poetry, born as beast, move best when free, undressed. So this is my answer to Professor Helen Wendler, the critic guru, right, from Harvard. So yeah, and then Tracy Smith, the poet laureate, actually used this poem. She recited this poem and wrote an essay for NPR called "Slow Down," and so yeah, this is really just my gut feeling, and also now my actual research about what is poetics and language and quantum physics, right? And so that's also my teaching philosophy. I have been teaching poetry at Macalester College, and I just like retired. So I'm a professor emerita um, of poetry. So yeah, that is the summary of my my meditation on language and poetry and poetics. Right? Who can write poetry, and who owns poetry? You know? Any questions?
And if you don't want to ask verbally, feel free to send a chat also.
It's not a question, but more of a comment. But I loved what you said about who can write poetry and kind of who owns it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the same thing applies to literature. And as a lot of different perspectives enter into literature right now and have been more recently, it's kind of come up a similar idea.
Who is the person? Who's asking who's speaking? Who am I speaking?
Oh, I'm Lucy. I'm a student at Montgomery.
Oh, okay. So Lucy, right? Is that you
Yeah.
holding a coffee cup? So
Yeah.
hi, Lucy. Yeah. That's really a very important question, and also everyone should be asking that question, right? And on my mind, from my heart, I truly believe poetry is our birthright, right? And poetry is part of the language, but also it's the best, the essence or the marrow, bone marrow of language, right? And it really forces us constantly rethinking like who we are, right? And why am I here, right? Where am I going, right? And what is my past yesterday, and what is today, and what is my tomorrow, right? And and if you look at that, like the poets in the past, the poets now, the poets, for the future, like, and also as a Chinese, right, poetry literally runs in our DNA, in our blood, right? And so, and it's really interesting. The first world poetry anthology was actually made in China by Confucius from 2,600 years ago, right? And we call it Shi Jing Poetry Bible, right? And if you look at the Book of Psalms, right, and you know the Bible, the book of I feel that the Book of Psalm is the spine and essence of the Bible that holds the entire teaching of Christianity or Judaism together, right? It's through the poetry, right? And yeah, so and who owns it? We own it. It doesn't really poetry does not belong to a few critics. It does not belong to people who gives out awards. you know, and we own it. And poetry is the highest and ultimate tool or path for our self-expression. You know, does I do I did I answer your question, Lucy?
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, so that's why that poem, right? I wrote it, I kept revising it, and I wrote it with my instinct at that time. That was written like 20 years ago, and it's like it becomes more and more valid, right? And so in the beginning, I used the language, and now I use the poetry born as beast, right? And also some version I say poetry born like river, right? And as a metaphor. So yeah. And also I have been writing articles about poetics, poetry is in the kind of like runs parallel with quantum physics, right? And if you really think about how many of you are interested in quantum physics, right? And also the features of the quantum physics, right? The entanglement, right? Everything is touching everywhere all the time. And quantum physics breaks or like erases the border of time and space, right? And if and all these features, right? And quantum physics, like time can be frozen, can be sped up, right? And in and these are all the features, the main features for poetry, right? The metaphor alone, right? We put two things together, and immediately the two objects that seemingly unrelated become entangled, right? That is metaphor, right? Whether we use the similar words, like simile words like or as, the way as, we don't need to use it, and all we need to do is just put a few things together, right, in the space, and then our brain just connect the knots. That also, as a medical researcher, I have a medical degree, and my main focus is on the brain neuron science, and how our brain works, right? And I really believe that poetry runs the closest to how our brain runs, right? If we really think about it, right? The way things running in our brain before we write it out, word by word, syllabus by syllabus, sentence by sentence. They run much more like poetry. They do not run as a linear, okay? Rather, they run like the stars, constellations. They run like spider webs, right? And so therefore, I tell my students the worst enemy in poetry is linear. Break the linear, break the logic, right? And just go like just like a spider web, right? Just go collage, which later I'm going to give you some exercise, and hopefully I will jumpstart your own poem about the concept of home using this collage method, and also use this collaboration, like the entanglement method. Okay, and Dadaism, the French, artists and also poets, they already practice that, and it's called um, exquisite corpse. I'm sure some of you have heard of it, right? And they, at that time, like they didn't know much about quantum physics, but the method is basically using the entanglement theory, right? And so, yeah. Uh, Sorry for this long, entangling answer to your question, Lucy. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I saw the chat room. Uh, yeah. Thank you, Karen, for your comments. And yeah, and also, let me see. I saw someone ask a question. Is that catfish? Are you there? Um, I saw a catfish McBarry's.
Yeah, that's me. Hi,
Oh,
Miss Ping.
hey. Yeah, I saw your chat room question.
Yeah, I
Your
wanted
name
to see
is
if you
Amy
know who
Tan,
I'm. Zhang.
and you asked me if I know Huangxiang. Yes, yes, Huangxiang. I met Huangxiang actually in Pennsylvania when I visited
His
there.
wife Victoria.
I never met his wife.
Okay,
Yeah.
she speaks English. He doesn't speak English.
Right. Yeah. He actually asked me to translate his poetry. I remember translating one poem by him, but I was busy, so busy at that time,
Right.
and my kids were young. I was teaching full time. I was traveling so much. Yeah. And Amy Tang, yeah, I'm familiar with her work. And tell me about what you think of Amy Tang.
I'm reading right now. I'm reading The Valley of Amazement,
Okay.
and this man, a friend, asked me to review her book, and I
Okay.
told him Amy Chan, her almost her prose is almost like every word's almost poetry. I
Okay.
see it. It's kind of reminds me of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to try to review something like that, it's beyond me. It'd be like if I was going to review the Bible, King James Version, or
Right.
like you said, or Tufu and Lai Po and Tufu's, uh, their little books of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way I could have, review that. And
Right.
I don't know. I was going to ask you about the rivers. Did you ever have any dangerous situations on the Mississippi or the Yangtze where
Oh,
you
yes,
overturned your
many.
boat?
Yeah, I was arrested a few times in along the Yangtze because I was doing the guerrilla war style to install the prayer flags.
Okay.
And even though it's like our prayer flags is all about like poetry and our expression for peace, because I was just kind of like disrupting the order. And so, but then very quickly, once the soldiers understood what I'm doing, they actually joined us. They actually made their own prayer flags, right? So there are a lot of miracles along the rivers through this project.
Yeah.
Actually, AWP gave me this award for nonfiction, and University of Georgia Press published this book. It's called The Life of Miracles Along the Yangtze and Mississippi. You should
Okay.
check it out. I know you would love this book.
Oh,
And there
yeah.
are a lot of very interesting cultural, comparison
Yeah.
and cultural common grounds, right? And a lot of ghosts. right? There are a lot of ghosts I encountered along the,
Oh, yeah.
especially along the Mississippi.
A lot of ghosts.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Ever heard of the great the what do you call the magic the John Robert Johnson, the
Oh,
Great Crossroad?
Robert Johnson down at the crossroads. You're
Yes.
talking about blues guitar now.
Yeah.
That's that's another kind of poetry.
Oh yeah, definitely poetry. Yeah, yeah, the Robert Johnson came to me when I was driving,
Okay,
and
there
it
you go.
got me lost, and I was just like everything just shut down, and it was a really very interesting encounter,
Uh-huh.
So check it out from that book.
Okay, sounds
Yeah,
good. I'll
yeah,
turn this back over to somebody else. Okay,
yeah.
really nice to meet you, Miss Pink.
Very nice, yeah, to meet you. And Stacy, I saw what you wrote. Yes, Louis Wash, in my mind, as a like very traditional Chinese person, so new to American culture, to suddenly see a hippie like figure, right, as a professor, that was just completely denied my expectation of what like a professor
Uh-huh.
is like. So that's why I use the word weird. And actually, he introduced me to Allen Ginsberg. He introduced me, There's another funny story is, and I stayed. That's the only workshop I took, right? A writing workshop,
Yeah.
like with Lewis, and I thought I was his best student. Then I found out he gave A to everyone, and I was really disappointed.
Oh yeah. I went to
But
his I went to Allen Ginsberg's farm in 1998
right,
in Cherry Valley, but he had already died by that time. Him
um,
and Burroughs. But I
right,
had a chance to meet them both, but I never did.
right. But
But
anyway, yeah. So he after the class, and I bumped into him, and on my way to library, he invited me to the Christmas party, and then I ordered orange juice. He made himself like screwdriver, and it looks exactly alike. And somehow, I got his screwdriver, and I got totally wasted because I don't drink, right? And I'm allergic to alcohol. So, and I started talking nonsense like, poetry is great and literature sucks, this kind of thing, and I made him so happy. And then he introduced me to Allen Ginsberg, who was looking for interpreter. That's how I got into poetry, through Louis Wash. And, he we became close friends for many years, and for many years he actually edited every word I wrote, and so he is extremely important for me as a poet and as a person. And
okay.
then I took him to Tibet, and I took him to China several times, and and
Wow.
yeah, so yeah.
You're a hippie then.
I am a hippie. Yeah, I think I have a hippie spirit, you know.
Me too.
Yeah, and so anything else?
No.
Yeah,
Okay. I'll see you later. I'll let somebody else in.
yeah,
How about a few more poems?
sure. What kind of poems would you like to read? Um, would you like to hear? Where's my book now? Oh, it is here. Okay.
Um, I would prefer to. I would like to hear the ones about your nature ones. We earlier in Marianne's class heard one about the journey of the rivers and the nature of it, and it really hit my soul of the combination of environment and poetry and what to do
Right.
as humans.
Marianne, which poem did you use?
Oh shoot. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. I think we did the South Hakka Man.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember. I remember talking about your river project, but I don't remember which. I'm sorry, but I don't remember.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so let me bring out nature poem then. Okay, so my last poem about nature actually is about it's a hazel and it's an ode to the color green. And is everyone interested in hearing that poem? And it's called The Biography of Green, an edible hazel, hazel. And so let me find that poem, then I will share it. Okay, just give me a moment. Poetry. I'm bringing this poem. This is included in my next project. It's called "The River in Our Blood." So it's in the voice of all, like from mountain, in the voice of mountains and rivers, and bugs and fish and eel, crab, and colors. So we're part of nature, right? And we're being taught or being just led to believe that we are the master of the earth, we're the master of nature, and we must conquer nature. And to me, this is just very, very wrong. And so, hold on, almost there. Biography, found it. Okay, all right. So I'm going to share the screen as I read it. Okay. Mm. Okay, I'm going to share it now. Um, share. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read it and you can also look at the words, okay? Biography of Green, an edible sonnet Hazal. With fiddle hands I fold and unfold light, painting air with emerald green, turning CO2 into sugar plus O, till I drape Mother Earth with 24 shades of green. This planet was born in a ball of fire, then basalt, then granite, then glacial ice. With sleight of hand, I pickled her into lime, sage, basil, pear, and apple green. I tap, clap, spin, whisper, sway with willows, my juniper veins open to the sun, my moss blood running towards roots, and life sings with parakeet green. Awakened from Arctic dreams, I chase grasslands and forests with seaweed tendrils, a linchpin between sky and earth, my wavelengths designed for spruce mint green. Spectrum between blue and yellow, Rosetta Stone for fern, shamrock, seafoam, sitting in the middle of the rainbow wheel. I open seasons with chartreuse mustard green. In China, there's no difference between blue and green. 青出于蓝而胜于蓝. Green equals chlorophyll equals green leaf equals photosynthesis equals O equals glucose equals pear equals pine, ocean green. A cycle without beginning or end, my sapphire wave shimmering, lighting up first word, smell, taste, sound, touch, till earth hangs on a twig of olive green. Count needles on cypress, count clapping hands on aspen trees, count trees on earth. Behold earth in my palms of 120 quadrillion leaves, a panthalassa of pistachio green. Thank you.
Can you read a love poem?
Huh?
Can you read a love poem?
A love poem. Yeah, well, let me see. I do have a, actually, the entire book of My Name is Immigrant is my love poem for immigrants. But I understand you want a love poem. Uh, Let me see. I don't write love poems very often, but I know I have quite a few. Uh, Let me see.
While you're looking, can you tell me again where that the Ode to Green, the biography of Green, it will be published, right? It's not published yet?
It's in my manuscript. It's actually on my Facebook.
Oh, okay.
I posted on Facebook and
Okay.
like a month and a half ago. So if you go to Wang Ping Facebook, you have to scroll it down and you can find it. Or if you want, I can send it to Marianne and you can have it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll look on your Facebook. Thank you.
Yeah, and also, the reason I wrote that poem is the color green is really literally the color for life, right? And no other color has that function. And therefore, it has 24 shades, and all the names that attributed to the color green is edible because it's related to life. Isn't interesting? So when I discovered that, I was just, and also it sits in the middle of color wheel, literally. And also, and another life that's color is close to the color green, that close to life is blue. That's the color of water, right? And that makes sense, right? And in Chinese, the color blue and green is literally the same color for Chinese, right? And so that's what inspired me to write that poem. And I love sonnet, 14 lines, and I love the Hazal, which is the format from Middle East, used a lot by Rumi, the poet Rumi, right? And he's a whirler, right? He whirled all the time, and as he was whirling, right, and you create the center, right? And so everyone should try to whirl. Actually, I teach that to my students to whirl and write poetry, right? And totally makes sense, And yeah, and then the hustle would just flow out of that center, you know, and yeah. So again, you know, you should try, this experiment was formed like in poetry. Hazal is a really fun format, and you find the key word and you just keep repeating it. And certain words I called echo words, right? And certain words carry a lot of weight, either history or biography or geometry or geology or, just like science. But science, for me, science is so close to poetry, right? And, you know, uh, so that's why I love poetry. I love science. I study quantum physics and string theory and astrology, astronomy all the time, right? And science is embedded in every move, every moment, and because we live in time and space, it's all about science, right? And if we pay attention, And the poetry is really the key to for us to actually pay attention. Writing poetry is literally like writing a meditation, you know. And when we meditate, when we pay attention, when we focus, right, life becomes a poem, right? And poetry exists everywhere, you know, in silence when we speak, in every step we make, like in every budding bud, right? Every flower, every blade of grass. That's why I love what Whitman, like, you know, he is the icon of American culture and American poetics. His vision is incredible, right? And the other person is Edgar Allan Poe. You know, he's the dark icon, right? You know, and yeah, have you studied Edgar Allan Poe? Oh, you should check him out. You know, it's
Never heard of him. I have never written poetry is brand new to me, so I have never tried it, and I would love to do it. Attica Adam Poe. Thank you.
Edgar Allan Poe, yeah. But I can tell when you start writing poetry, we're going to write some poems later. And I would love to hear your poem today, okay? I can tell you're a poet from your expression, from your being, your vibration, you know. Yeah. And we're all connected, like as human being, as life, right? A tree has vibration, a rock has a lot of vibration. A drop of water has vibration. It's all energy, right? Everything comes down to the energy. And what is energy? It is vibration, right? And what is vibration? It is the rhythm, right? And what is music? And what is poetry, right? Think about it, right? And everything, just poetry is embedded in everything, you know? And if we pay attention, we all become poets. And we write poetry, we walk poetry all the time. There's no reason why, you know. Carolina, you love Edgar Allan Poe, yes. And yeah, uh, and you said English is not your first language, and that is your advantage actually, because you have two languages and you have two worlds. Use it to your advantage, and especially use it for poetry. And I bet your poetry, once you start writing poetry, your poetry will shock the world. So, yeah. Yes, I guess my heart is drenched in green as this island. Yes, absolutely. Who's AMJ? Can I see you? I love that. That is
Yes,
just,
that was me.
oh yeah, that is so poetic. You have to use it as the first line, okay? To write a poem
I
about
am
green.
totally enamored with Ireland, considering I've never been there.
Okay, yes, and being island Irish, I know once I are an Irish person, you're forever an Irish person. It's in your DNA. You can't escape it.
Literally.
Yes, that's right. It's in your skin, it's in your hair, in your blood. You know, nobody can. I don't know what is it. You should go back and check out the land. I bet it has a lot to do with the land. Okay.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, you should go back and check it out and connect. You know, that is your root. Yeah? Okay.
I will most certainly see what Irish poetry I can find.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, today we're going to write some poetry about home. So you need to write about island then, which is your spiritual ancestral home, right?
Oh, of course, which is probably what draws me to everything, to the culture, the music, and
Yeah,
of course,
and the movement, of
undoubtedly
course,
their
the river dance, right?
poetry.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
everything except their food that they are known for.
the food.
No, everything except the food. Their
Oh,
cuisine is not as notable.
I'm not too
Else.
convinced. Yeah, I have never been to Ireland, but I would love to go there. And they have beard, right?
Oh,
Irish beer. That
they are known for Guinness. Guinness is their famous
their
beer,
yeah,
and whiskey, of course.
right. Yeah, that is their blood. So
And whiskey in Gaelic literal translation of the Gaelic term for whiskey means water of life. Hilarious.
Ah! That's awesome.
Which is
Well,
pretty funny.
so you already have several topics for poetry.
Of course, I've already written a poem about Ireland,
Okay, that's great.
but
That's
it was a 16-line poem. I'd
yeah,
have to go dig it out.
yeah, right. Yeah, that's great. Yes, Chilean poem. Yes, Mark. Yes, I have read sometime not too much, but a little bit of Paul Zarita's the Chilean poet, and I actually knew a few Chilean poets, and that's also my wish to go there. You know, that trip to visit Brazil and then go to the desert, the driest desert, the place on earth in Chile, and so are you there, Mark?
I
And
am?
yeah, hi. Yeah, are you from Chile?
No, no.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought that his poetry had a similar kind of resonance to yours.
Oh, thank you.
Very, very, very raw and a lot of emotion and a lot of experience.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I like rawness in poetry, you know. And yeah, and the new manuscript, The River in Our Blood, will be will be still very raw, but because a lot of like form poetry, I had actually it includes a sonnet crown, so that 15 poems, 15 sonnets just linked together, and so I try to break a little bit because I get bored writing, the same form over and over again. I try to break it a little bit to make it more interesting. So, but when I write and when I teach poetry, I always like 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 my feet, right? And I tell my students the feet has to be planted in the soil all the time. That's where the power, the rawness, the power comes from that. Never ever leave the earth. We are Samson. Is that Samson? Is that Samson? Right? The giant who is lifted, who's killed only because he is lifted away from the earth. Right? What's the myth? Right? Anyone? Um, the mythology, that giant who cannot be killed until he is lifted away
Oh.
from the earth.
Now Samson was the one that his hair was cut, so
Okay.
so he wasn't the lifted one.
Yeah, he's not. Okay. So there's another one. I have to check it out because, yeah.
Maybe Goliath?
I don't remember. I just remember the story and I forgot the name. Sorry about that, Amu. But I'm sure we can find out. Or if any of you just Google it, like which mythology giant was killed because he was lifted, his feet was lifted off the earth, and otherwise he cannot be killed, you know. So, and let us know. I
I
will,
think it's Antonius.
okay. Okay, is that Greek or Greek myth?
Yeah, Greek mythology.
Great, thank you. Who is talking? A?
Ash.
Ash? Hi, thank you, Ash, for finding out.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we should all be that giant, right? Have our feet always, always planted on the earth when we write, no matter how high we fly, how far away, how polished, right? And that's where our power comes from, you know. So, yeah. And of course, music in poetry, that's the rhythm, that's our vibration, that's, our energy, that's our fuel, right? And then image, right? So, yeah, if your music is right, and even if you're talking gibberish, you can still keep going for quite a long time, actually. So that's where the language poetry comes from, right? You know, and of course, language poetry has its own imagerism, and you know. But for me, it's the rhythm and the music in it, you know. So the poetry is actually the art of two things, right? You know, music is the art of time, the rhythm, and sculpture or art is the art of images, right? The space, right? Especially sculpture. But poetry, it has to be both, right? The art of time, rhythm, music, and the art of space and image, you know. So I hope like we should, and I know your instincts just know. As poets, if you're interested in poetry, you already know intuitively what poetry is about, right? And so just trust your instinct, you know. Yeah.
Can we hear a few more of yours?
Okay. Um, so let me read a poem because I think it's about time soon to edge into the workshop. So I like to start reading this poem. I call it collage poem or circling poem or prose poem, right? And circling around the concept of home, which will be the theme of the poetry workshop when we begin. So I'd like to read this, and um, so I'm not going to show you the poem in writing right now, and you can just listen, okay? It's called 回家, circling home. Every Chinese belongs to 老家, our native land, ancestor, our food, name, spirit, roots. 老, old, origin. Over the head is 土, earth, and a plow cutting through the ground to make home. Every Chinese wants to go home, 回老家, or simply go home, no matter how far we wander. At 14, I left home on the big island of the East China Sea. I worked in a fishing village for the 1 in a million chance to go to college. I never returned. 3 years later, I left the village to study English in Hangzhou. I never returned to the island. I left Hangzhou for Beijing University. My college dream came true at 22. I left China in 1986 to pursue my PhD at NYU. I never returned. Go back home, Americans scream, from streets, colleges, social media. Still, I never went back. I drift farther away from Weihai, my 老家, carrying that old earth in my dreams. Shanghai is my birthplace. Zhoushan Archipelago, Zhoushan Qundao, is where I grew up till 17. I studied English in Hangzhou and Beida, Beijing University. I earned my master's and PhD at NYU. As a foreigner, I taught poetry 21 years as an English professor at an elite college. The only and last miracle. I've raised my sons, trained poets and writers. My old home is still registered as Shandong, Weihai. My 老家, my earth, 土, my heart, 心, my liver. For Chinese, the liver stores blood and the heart moves it, a circuit of paths leading to one destination, home. At night, the blood must go home to restore the soul and settle the spirit. If it can't go home, we have insomnia. At 50, I took my sons to the Yellow Sea. It was our first time to see 老家. Factories and buildings have taken over the land my father talked about every day. The wheat fields are gone, the village is gone, The sand beach is gone. My grandma's grave still stands in the yam fields. I sit down in front of her stone, and everything floods up. Sorrow, joy, bitter, sweet, her stories, handmade bread, noodles and dumplings, my father roaming on the island in search of immortal reishi mushroom, 灵芝, his longing to go back home, 回家. I watch my sons eating steamed bread, strung together like beads with a red thread. It is their first time to eat this traditional food, but they devour it as if it has been their daily meal since birth, as if they were slurping Cheerios and milk. This is the bread my father craved while living on this island, while sailing the East China Sea as a commander. Return, 回, a mouth within a mouth. Is that why there's a Chinese restaurant wherever there are Chinese, just so we could go back home through our food? Is that how my sons are tied to their 老家 in China, even though they were born in New York City and Minneapolis, love pizza, play hockey and baseball, speak English, Hebrew, and Chinese? I checked the dictionary. 回 equals 回 equals return equals go home by walking, traveling, wandering on earth, carrying mouth, 回 on the traveler's back, 回. I remember my DNA test by National Geographic. 200,000 years ago, my ancestors walked out of Africa, crossed the land and sea, following food, hunting, gathering, making home along their paths, reaching South China after 100,000 years. I remember my father left home at 16 to fight the Japanese invasion, lived and died on the island in the East China Sea, but in his heart, home is forever Weihai by the Yellow Sea. Just like monarchs, geese, salmon, elephants, weeds, and other life on earth, traveling through thousands of miles to follow food, but always know how to go back, 回老家. Home is a transit word, 回, return, go home. I keep digging. I need to find the origin. What I found makes my hair stand up. In the oldest Chinese version of Chinese, when words were carved on the bones of birds and whales, on the backs of turtles, 回 equals water, 回 equals water rippling, equals pushing, whirling, circling towards home. Home is embedded in the water. Going home is embedded in running water. When Chinese see the word 回, we have already arrived. My heart feels at home finally. We are water, born to move, wander, migrate, whirl, circle. No need to get mad when people shout, go home at us. We all carry home in our heart and liver, in our blood, in our DNA, as we flow from continent to continent, from sea to sea, to appease the soul, to circle back home. 回, 回, go home. I guess, thank you. And someone asked me to read a love poem. I consider this a love poem for home. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, questions? Yeah, thank you. This is the love poem you requested.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
How is Allen Ginsberg? Where did you find Allen Ginsberg?
Yeah, he passed away a long time ago. You know that, right?
Yeah.
He's great. We actually we actually had a fight, and after the poetry festival, I traveled with him everywhere and being his interpreter and translator. And then when the festival was over, he had a party in his home, and then I was translating for the Chinese poets and Alan, and in his bedroom there was this tanka, the Tibetan Buddhist sacred religious painting, and the Chinese poets asked like, "What is that?" And Alan started telling him about Tibetan Buddhism, and then he got carried away, and he, as he was talking about how Chinese government was hurting the monks and burned the temples, and Chinese poets kept saying things are much better, just don't worry. And Alan just suddenly started to say, what the F do you know about Tibet, right? And he was screaming at me, and I just said, Alan, like, don't yell at me, I'm translating for you. I didn't say those words, and so yeah, and then he realized what he did, and he walked away and came back with a pile of his rare books, right? And he started drawing Buddha and lotus and stars and chanting on each of the book and signed the name. Then he said, "My apology for yelling about Buddha," right? And then we became best friends. And that is the moment I decided I'm going to Tibet and see what is going on there. And so the minute I got my green card, I went to Tibet. And the moment I stepped on the land, I just felt everything. I understood everything, and I fell in love with that land and the sky, right? The Lhasa is almost like 5,000 meters already. And you just immediately just get dizzy, stumble. You have to relearn how to breathe, and you have to relearn how to walk, basically, right? Just imagine, like that moment, like suddenly your world is upside down, and you have to relearn everything, right? And that changed everything for me. And I've been going back uh, as much as I can. And basically, every time I go back to China, I will go to Tibet. That is like my like prayer, right? And my pilgrimage, And yeah, and even like the first time I went, I remember the first time that the eve I was going to China, and I saw Allen Ginsberg at this musician, um, what's his name? It's a very famous modernist musician, composer, Philip Glass, right? And we were chanting, they were all like Tibetan Buddhists, and we were chanting, and I told Alan I'm going to China, Tibet next day. And he said, I wish I could go, but the doctors wouldn't allow me to go. But please pray, visit the temples and pray for me on my behalf. And I have been doing that for Alan. And that story actually was included in Life of Miracles along the Mississippi and Tibet and Yangtze. So yeah, you should check it out, and you will. And it started with Allen Ginsberg's story and ended with my calling, singing, and hearing Alan's calling on the Everest, So yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, Ethan, Marianne,
Yeah, how do you want to do it? Because maybe you could do one more poem if you feel like it, or we could go into the workshop.
Well, we
Yeah,
probably take a break.
Oh, yeah,
yeah, maybe take a break. I'm a
Yeah,
little
probably
bit,
take a break.
yeah, let's take, how long is the break?
Maybe 5 minutes or so. Maybe how many? 7. I usually say 7 minutes.
Sure, okay, that's great. I'm going to mute now and come back in 5, 7 minutes, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.